Hi everyone. Just got a short lecture on state legislatures here. So, obviously there's 50 states, and that really means there's 50 different state legislatures. And so this lecture is really just going to talk about some of the commonalities and ways to think about them. Of the 50 states, all but one have two houses. So all but one have a bicameral legislature. I realize the picture below is not very good of the state capitol that that has only one chamber. That is actually supposed to be a picture of Nebraska. State legislatures, there's quite a bit of variation, and so one of the ways we think about them are in these categories of green, gray, and gold. And so what this means, I'll show you here in a couple of slides. What this means is it has to do with the length of the legislative session, the size of the staff, and a couple of other criteria. So I realize that that the little part of the screen where I am is probably covering some of the words, but you've got this slide, so I think you can see them. So green states, or states with green legislatures, I should say, are full-time legislators. That means typically legislators don't have another job. They're paid enough to not require other kind of outside employment. They also have a large staff that is equally well paid. Gray legislatures are sort of this hybrid category. Gray legislatures are sort of this hybrid category. The people in gray legislature states would make more than in gold states, but sort of not enough to allow them a really comfortable living. So oftentimes there's other kind of work in addition to being a legislature. In addition to being a legislator. And likewise, they have a sort of this intermediate sized staff. It's typically not something they would do full time, and they're not as well paid. So at the sort of other end of the spectrum are these things called gold legislatures. They are part time. The positions typically are not compensated all that well, although they are compensated, and then they have a small staff. The states with gold legislatures, you can imagine, tend to be smaller, more rural, and states with green and gray legislatures tend to be the bigger states with more people, more land area, that kind of thing. So here's just a map of the different types of legislatures in the 50 states. You can see that New York, Pennsylvania, and California are sort of the darkest green, and the legislatures in these states have full-time, well-paid, large staff. The legislatures work full-time. And then there's the green category, and the gold category has been sort of subdivided into this light thing as well. So you can take a look at your where your state falls. I'm going to keep going, but you can pause the recording if you want to spend a little bit more time with this. Again, the states that tend to be bigger tend to or more populous, I should say, tend to fall towards the greener side of things. I would say there are probably a couple of exceptions, Texas most notably, but certainly states like Virginia, some of the other, Virginia, New Jersey, Maryland, that kind of thing. Some of those states are exceptions as well. Here's that list. I'll let you pause the video if you want to spend a little bit more time looking at it. So this is the data from this slide are actually a couple years old, but so it's probably been updated. But I think the thing that's relevant here is just it highlights the difference between the category of legislatures and the amount of time they spend on the job, the amount of compensation they get, and their staff. So, for example, look at the on the right hand side of the page, the total staff. Look at the differences between those big full-time legislatures and the small part-time legislatures. I mean, you're talking almost 10 times as many staff between the two. Again, money. The people in who have who are working in green legislature states are making 4 times what other people are, but they're also spending significantly more time on the job. This obviously begs some questions. And are the needs of the state best served by the type of legislature? And I'll let you spend some time thinking about that and sort of reflecting on what's oops, didn't mean to advance that there. What's appropriate for your state? So obviously, as well, the number of legislatures also varies by state. New Hampshire is quite large. They've got 400 members in their House, but only 24 in the Senate. Missouri and Texas a little bit closer to sort of what might be considered average or normal. They've got 34 in their Senate and 153 in their Assembly. Pennsylvania, obviously where Edinburgh is located, has got 203 members in their House and 25 in the Senate. And I realize Iowa's cut off there. Iowa's kind of an interesting case. They've got 50 in their Senate, and then they've got double that in their House. They've got 100. Again, the point of this is just to sort of show you the heterogeneity in the different kinds of state legislatures. I realize, obviously, I haven't included, all of the states. I've only just put a smattering of them up here. But I'd encourage you, obviously, if your state isn't listed here, to take a look. Probably pretty easy to find with a quick Google search, what the makeup of your state legislature is. So term limits are this thing that appear in the news every now and then. A term limit is really just a legal restriction on the number of terms an office holder can hold in any one particular elected office. Typically, that a term limit would reset if an office holder goes to a different job. So oftentimes people, might go from, say, a city councilman to maybe mayor. And so the term limits, the number of terms that a person served as a council person, wouldn't count towards a term limit if there was one for mayor. And that's sort of typically true across all levels of government. There are term limit proposals that sort of pop up from time to time. These have really been going on since probably 1990, and actually even before then. But they've been going on really at the state level since 1990, when term limits were passed by voters in California, Colorado, and Oklahoma. So I just put the formatting is all messed up on this slide. I will have to fix that. States with term limits, I just put that up here. I'll let you take a look at that. Obviously, there's pros and cons to the different kinds of there are pros and cons to term limits. I mean, on one hand, you've got people who are familiar with the job and the needs of the state and the needs of the people and with how systems work. But then on the other hand, you've got people who sort of become too, I think the argument, for them is that people become too enmeshed, and they start focusing on sort of the needs of a narrow constituency and not everyone. So some of the things that the federal government sort of assigns or cedes to state government are things like education, human services, and then things related to health, environment, labor, and agriculture. Remember, this idea of a federalist system is that the federal government is sort of the central authority, but they're able to delegate or cede, C-E-D-E, certain issues to states because the belief is that states are in a better position to administer some programs and sort of deal with things that are deal with the issues that are important to their state without having those priorities sort of set by the federal government. And sort of the logic is that, say, things in Florida might be a little bit different than things in Illinois, right? The needs might be different. And so the state government in one state is better suited to address the needs of that state than having those needs dictated by the federal government. There is sort of, a third layer here, and that's often the way that county governments interact with state governments. County funding, if there are healthcare programs or public assistance programs, that's often based on federal funding that's sort of filtered through the state. The states often have to pass legislation that sort of sets up the process by which funds are sort of filtered down through those different levels of federal government, state government, county government, things like that. Counties actually take responsibility for administering certain things that social workers interact with. So oftentimes there's public assistance programs that are sort of administered by the county, but obviously those programs come from, are funded by dollars that come from the state and federal governments as well. So there's often a lot of interaction between county commissioners or supervisors and that kind of thing with state and federal officials. So state bureaucracies really mirror federal bureaucracy, and that's again so that states can sort of fulfill the obligations to the citizenry. And take care of the things that have been ceded to states or state control by the federal government. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, the Department of Labor and Industry is what's responsible for compliance issue in residential treatment facilities. Interesting to note, though, that that is not true in New York, and that may not be true in other states. So, one of the things that I said in the beginning of this presentation is actually true. Or one of the things I said about legislatures is true about sort of bureaucracy in general. There's 50 different legislatures, each with its own unique characteristics, and then there's 50 different bureaucracies as well. So moving on here. So local governments can have typically a pretty big impact. That's especially true if there's a county that's especially populous. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, there's Philadelphia, and then there's sort of the rest of the state, and that's because Philadelphia is obviously the biggest city in Pennsylvania, and it exists sort of in that Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philly, New York, Boston sort of corridor. It's in the one of the most dense and populous corridors in the U.S. In New York, where I live, the sort of analogy would be there's New York City, and then there's sort of the rest of the state. So the big cities have sort of a way to influence politics. Service areas typically have advocacy groups, and they help to shape policy as well. This is a good thing because these advocacy groups typically have the best needs of clients and workers in mind, and so they can advocate for policies that are sort of most effective and most useful for their workers. From an organizational standpoint, elected county executives, they're often called commissioners or supervisors and things like that. They're really the ones who are responsible for implementing the policy that's set by whatever legislative body. And oftentimes the interest groups that I've sort of listed here have good relationships with those county executives. So that's everything for this slide. As always, let me know if that's everything for this presentation. As always, let me know if any questions. Thank you.